You're listening to Boomers Today with your host, Frank Sampson.
Well, welcome to Boomers Today. I'm your host, Frank Sampson. Of course, each week we bring you important and very useful information on issues facing baby boomers, their parents, and other loved ones. And we have another great show for you this week. And the reason, I want to be sure to thank all of you is because you're sharing individual podcasts and the entire show with friends and family. And, some of you, probably most of you are listening on either Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio. We're on all the podcast stations. So thank you for all your support. And I do know for sure why you're sharing our show with others is because we have wonderful guests, very educational, and we're not going to disappoint you today. We have with us Dr. Edward Shaw, who is duly trained as a physician and mental health counselor. He was the primary care partner for his late wife, Rebecca, who was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease in 2007 at age 53 and died in 2016 after a 9-year journey. Ed was a practicing academic radiation oncologist for 23 years, specializing in the treatment of adults and children with brain cancer. In 2010, inspired by Rebecca's journey, his medical interest shifted to dementia diagnosis and treatment. And with his additional training in mental health counseling, he founded the Memory Counseling Program in 2011, part of the section on Gerontology and Geriatric Medicine at the Sticht Center on Healthy Aging and Alzheimer's Prevention at Atrium Health Wake Forest Baptist in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. The program serves individuals, couples, and families affected by Alzheimer's disease or another type of dementia. Dr. Shaw also has authored 4 books on dementia, which we will discuss shortly. So, Dr. Shaw, thank you for joining us from North Carolina.
Thanks so much, Frank, for having me.
Yes. So, a lot to go over. I kind of want to start out with a question that I'm not sure I'm using the right term because, as you know, I'm not a medical professional, but, being in the industry and the senior care industry for many years, to me, if this isn't an epidemic, I don't know what is, but, those experience various forms of dementia like Alzheimer's and others, which we'll talk about. It seems to me to be an epidemic. I don't know if you agree with that. Love to get your thoughts. And I guess part 2 is, are we ready? Is this country ready? Is this world ready for what we're getting hit with now and in the very near future?
Yeah, it's a great question, Frank. When I think of the word epidemic, as a doctor, I think about, a disease that has a rapid increase. So we've just been through the COVID epidemic, and certainly we saw that. Dementia is a little bit different. It's not an infectious disease like COVID, but it is a disease whose incidence, whose frequency in the population is rapidly increasing. So right now, about 7 million people are living with Alzheimer's in the United States. 25 years from now, in the year of 2050, that number will double to almost 14 million. And so is the country ready for that? I think the answer is probably no. And it's a very provocative question you asked me. I've never been asked that question before. And, when I think about us boomers and taking care of aging parents or ourselves becoming aging parents, I think we're very used to, as caregivers, taking care of people who have physical ailments, like a parent with arthritis or maybe, even dealing with cancer. But those are diseases, physical diseases, where the mind is intact. But when you talk about caring for someone with a disease where they're having progressive memory loss or, cognitive decline, those are challenges we're sort of not naturally able or ready to deal with. And I think that's what makes dementia caregiving so challenging for those of us who have done it or are doing it. So I feel like maybe we're not so ready.
Yeah. And so maybe it would be helpful, maybe we could just educate our listeners. As you know, I've been doing the podcast for a while. We've had guests answering this question I'm going to ask you, but to me, the more we can repeat this and educate people, the better. But I guess the question is more, what is dementia? What is it? And, maybe comparing dementia to Alzheimer's and maybe other types of dementia, if you could kind of give us an overview there.
Sure. Yeah. So when I think about, the question, what is dementia? I think about having worked in a dementia diagnosis clinic. If we see a patient who comes in and maybe they have some memory loss and they or the family are concerned, we really are asking two questions, and this is the two-part definition of what is dementia that I use. Does the person have cognitive decline? That's kind of question number one. So our cognitive functions are nominally 5 things. We pay attention, we remember, we multitask, we understand and speak language, and then we navigate ourselves spatially in our 3-dimensional world. Those are the 5 main cognitive functions. Most people that come in for a dementia evaluation, it's memory loss, that, my loved one or I'm having way more memory loss than I would expect. So if we find that they have more cognitive issues than, age-matched peers, then we'll say, yes, this person has cognitive decline. The other part of the definition is that it results in some kind of functional dependence, that as a result of having poor memory, the person can't do things they used to be able to do. Drive, balance their checkbook, take their medications, prepare a meal by following a recipe. And as a result of that, they become more functionally dependent on others, or in other words, they lose their functional independence. And this is where the caregiving aspect comes in. So yeah, to answer your question, it's cognitive function loss plus it's functional dependence. That's how I think about the definition of dementia.
Gotcha. So this is, I guess, the next question I want to, ask you is just, when we're, any one of us, you have a pain, go, well, my shoulder's hurting. All right. I, better go get that checked. Or, the sniffles start. I think I'm getting a cold, or I got a sore throat. I mean, you could almost not self-diagnose from a standpoint of knowing what it is, but you're feeling it, right?
Yes.
With cognitive challenges, usually when I get friends of mine that know I'm in the industry, they go, God, I can't find my keys or this or that. If they're like aware of some of the things that they're doing, I almost like say, well, you're fine. Don't worry about it.
Right.
But if somebody is challenged with some cognitive issues, the person that is really could have what's called MCI, which you could explain, but mild cognitive impairment that could lead into some form of dementia like Alzheimer's. Do they realize it? Realize that, hey, something's going on here? Or is it almost have to be recognized by a family member, friend, et cetera, that something's up?
Sure. So, Frank, this is another really insightful question. Rooted around the notion of what we in the field call insight. So insight is a brain function that helps you understand kind of what's going on in a given situation in your life. So insight is related functions would be like judgment, decision making. And for people who are living with dementia, about half of them in the earlier stages will have preserved insight. They'll understand that, gosh, I don't remember like I used to, or gee, it seems like I lose my train of thought in the middle of a sentence. In other words, they'll know what's going on. But about half of them will not. And it'll really, those are the situations where the family might bring mom or dad in and say, she gets lost in her own home now. So we're really worried about that. And the mom will say, look, I'm fine. I just, so I forgot where the bathroom was. So early on, about half of people have insight, half don't. By the time the person, has progressed through the stages and they're in the sort of the late middle stage or late stage, they've all lost insight. And, in some ways, loss of insight, it's a blessing and it can be a curse. So the blessing is that people who have lost insight, who are living with dementia, they don't suffer so much with it. They're not as frustrated with themselves because they don't recognize what they've lost. But then to be at that point, you do have to be farther along, and you've lost a lot of, the rest of the person that is a loved one makes it hard because they're not the person they used to be. So that was a really long answer to your question.
No, that's, I never heard that term, insight. So that's very good. Thank you for that. Alzheimer's, you kind of explained some of the, differences, but if someone were to get a diagnosis from a physician of dementia, they say dementia, okay, is that because they don't have an answer of what type of dementia it may be, and therefore dementia is the diagnosis? They don't know if it's Alzheimer's. They don't know if it's Lewy body. They don't know if it's frontal lobal. They don't know what kind.
Yeah.
So explain that when someone is told or they hear someone has dementia, how come they couldn't fine tune that? I'm sure it's not so easy, but maybe you could explain.
So yes, and so I think in 2024, we have arrived at a point where we can accurately identify whether a person has dementia and what type of dementia they have, in 99+% of cases. So maybe somebody goes to, their GP, their primary care doctor, and that doctor would say, well, I think you have dementia. But I think then you have to go to the next step now and go to a specialist, which would be like a geriatrician or a psychiatrist, a neurologist, a neuropsychologist, somebody whose bread and butter is diagnosing dementia, because now we have the ability through a physical examination, a medical history, blood tests, and imaging studies that we can accurately diagnose the type of dementia in 99% of people. So, and this has really changed. Dementia was first identified in 1906 by the German neuropathologist, Dr. Alzheimer. And we have had more advances in the last 10 years, than the prior 100+ years in understanding what dementia is. So yes, we really can differentiate between the major forms of dementia, and we can do it quite accurately. So, and that's important to have a correct diagnosis, because now we have some treatment for Alzheimer's disease. We will eventually, in a predictable time frame, have treatment for the other forms of dementia. And so the prognosis of each type is a little bit different, and how we manage these from a medical and mental health perspective is also different. So really figuring out exactly what type, Frank, is super important.
Yeah, got it. So we're going to take a real quick break, I promise, just to recognize our sponsor, and we come back. Certainly would like you to share a little bit more about how people could learn more about what you're doing and the books you've written. And then I do want to get into what you mentioned, some of recent approved drugs and treatment and what you see on the horizon. So we'll do that when we get back. All right. So I just wanted to ask all of you, do you know anyone who may be concerned about an older driver? Well, Senior Care Authority's Beyond Driving with Dignity program is a facilitated self-assessment program for older drivers. This program has been designed to serve as a vital tool to facilitate older drivers and their families as they make appropriate decisions regarding the future of one's safe driving career. If the individual is a safe driver, an advisor will provide him or her with strategies on how to remain a safe driver as they progress through the aging process. If driving retirement is the appropriate decision, then the individual and their family are offered possible alternatives, resources, and a specific plan to ensure a smooth and successful transition from the driver's seat to the passenger seat. So to learn more, go to www.beyonddrivingwithdignity.com or call 877-907-8841 to connect with a Senior Care Authority advisor in your area. So we're back with Dr. Edward Shaw, who is duly trained as a physician and mental health counselor, and we're learning a whole lot about dementia and other, and forms of dementia. So before we kind of talk about some of the recent drugs that have been developed, tell us a little bit more for our listeners on, how they could learn more about your great work. And I know you have authored some books. I'd love you to share that with everybody and how they could get those books.
Sure. Well, thanks for that opportunity. I'll talk about two of my books. The first book that I wrote begins with the story of our family's journey with my late wife Rebecca's Alzheimer's disease. And as I sort of transition into counseling caregivers, I found that I was using a book by Dr. Gary Chapman called The 5 Love Languages to really help family caregivers and to help my own adult children and I connect with Rebecca to sort of keep the love alive. So with Dr. Gary Chapman and Deborah Barr, we wrote a book called Keeping Love Alive as Memories Fade, The 5 Love Languages and the Alzheimer's Journey. And it's about the emotional toil of caregiving and how you can use the 5 love languages as like a simple toolkit to kind of keep that emotional bond, the emotional connection alive as the person is cognitively and emotionally slipping away, which is really, part of the grief of losing a loved one from dementia. Mm-hmm. The book I wrote later, my more recent book, is called The Dementia Care Partners Workbook. And it's a book about all aspects of caregiving, all the way from diagnosis to end of life and sort of everything in between. Talk about challenging behaviors, grief and loss on the journey, caregiver self-care, lots of different topics written in a very usable format, some space for journaling. So it's like a handbook for care partners. And so, I wrote it from the perspective of being a doctor and a mental health counselor, but mostly being a caregiver for 9 years. And so right. I hope that comes through in the book.
Great. So is there a website they can go to, or what's the best way to learn more?
Yeah, so you can go to my website. My speaking and writing company is called Empath Education, like the word empathy without the Y at the end, empatheducation.com. And there are descriptions of all my books and then links to those books. So thank you.
Great. Well, that's wonderful. So kind of getting back to our, discussion and what you had mentioned before about, maybe some recent drugs that are being used to help people, treat Alzheimer's. I mean, we see it all the time. And I mean, I kind of got almost when I would see about new drugs being tested and they're testing it and they're very optimistic, I was always getting kind of excited about that. And then well, it didn't really work. And then another one, then it didn't work. And so it's like I stopped paying attention to it, even though I hear about it all the time. But there have been some breakthroughs recently. So maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, so we now have a couple of different FDA-approved drugs. I think the main one that's being used now is a drug called lecanemab. So it's Lecanemab, and people can Google that and get more information about it. But lecanemab and really all of these drugs end with the letters AB, and the AB stands for antibody. So an antibody is an immune cell. So we have all kinds of antibodies against infectious diseases and allergens and cancer, running around our body. But you can also administer an antibody through the vein or in the form of a pill, and that antibody will go after a bad guy in the body. So in the case of lecanemab, this first FDA-approved drug, and the drug that's being used now, we have a lecanemab clinic here at Wake Forest Baptist Health. It's an intravenous drug, and when you give the drug, it will circulate through the blood. It'll go up into the brain, and it's an antibody against the amyloid protein, which is the bad protein in the brain that kind of accumulates in the brains of people with Alzheimer's, and it sort of gums up the brain. It irritates the neurons, the nerve wires, and causes the nerve wires to not function as well, and they'll eventually die, and it then causes the brain to shrink. That's where the functional loss comes in, and the cognitive loss, because your neurons don't work as well, and they eventually die. So lecanemab was approved because it will eliminate more than 90% of the amyloid that's in the brain. So that's the good news. The challenge is, Frank, that it's not a cure, that even removing the amyloid, it doesn't sort of fix the damage that's already occurred. It will slow the progression. The person won't decline as quickly, but eventually the person will have progression, and the disease will worsen. So I would call it a bunt single, but it's not. Maybe it's not that home run that you were hoping to find when you read through medical reports. But I would say that because it's kind of a first-in-class medication, it has opened the door for so many other medications like lecanemab that will probably be more effective and frankly safer. Lecanemab in certain subsets of people, they may have quite a high risk of like a stroke or a brain bleed, and so you have to be very cautious about who gets the drug and to monitor for those side effects.
My understanding is, drugs like lecanemab, you have to kind of catch it early. So kind of what you were talking about before is that if there is a, family or whatever, has a loved one and saying, maybe we should get mom or dad tested, that would be a good idea to do, because if it's at the right time, this drug could be more effective. My understanding is that if you're kind of further along with the disease, it probably is not effective. Is that correct?
Yes, that's true. In fact, it can be harmful if it's given late in the disease. And this gets back to your thoughtful question earlier of, can you really tell the dementias apart? And we have to come to a point within our healthcare system where if we as boomers or our parents say, gosh, I just seem like I'm getting so forgetful, that instead of, kind of attributing that to, well, you're getting a little bit older, if it turns out that forgetfulness is the very earliest stage of Alzheimer's disease, you want to know that as soon as possible, because these drugs are going to be the most effective the earlier you catch the disease. when you catch it at what's called the mild cognitive impairment stage, which is where you have some cognitive decline, but it's not yet impacting your function. And we have to get the whole sort of people in the system more sensitive to a much earlier diagnosis for these drugs to really work.
Right, right. And, you brought a great example up earlier when you said, mom got lost in her own house. All right. I mean, that would be kind of an obvious to me, let's go get tested versus maybe kind of lost her way in an area she was already unfamiliar with. But wouldn't you say you got to, some of this is a little bit of common sense, I think. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good.
I think your statement question makes me think about, well, what is the difference between like normal brain aging, like where you forget somebody's name or you forget the name of an object, you leave your keys somewhere and you can't find them. That's all kind of normal stuff for all of us as we get less young. But when I think about, well, what is abnormal brain aging? Well, if you can't remember your spouse's name or the names of your adult children or your grandchildren, unless you have, several dozen of them, or your closest friends, that's not normal. If you're in a conversation like you and I are, and, you get halfway through a sentence and you kind of forget where you were going, that's not normal. We can remain conversational normally all the way through our lifespan. If you start losing if you forget where you went to high school or where you graduated from college or, where your first job was or the street you grew up on, these are kind of, we call them, this is called crystal memory. And, like who was president during the Civil War. This is all stuff that we learn as, we grow up and experience, but we don't forget. But when people lose that stuff, these kind of core memories, that's not normal. Right. And then if you see the functional decline, I think of my 94-year-old mother-in-law, Rebecca's mom, who now has mild dementia herself, mild Alzheimer's. She used to be a great cook, and she was an amazing cookie maker. And all of a sudden, the cookies, didn't come out right, and they didn't taste right. And, if you see someone not doing something that they were really good at, that's really not part of normal cognitive aging. So those are things I think to kind of pay attention to. If you use the word common sense, if that trigger doesn't feel right, if it feels like more than common sense, then that's time to go in and get assessed.
Right. So, we only have a couple minutes left, and we probably we could devote an entire show to the question I'm going to ask you next. All right. And you, unfortunately, went through the experience yourself, and that was being a caregiver for someone with dementia. But what do you think are some of the greatest challenges we face, with with the caregivers themselves? I mean, I know we've been talking totally about the person with the disease, but the caregivers themselves, need to be healthy, and it's can be extremely challenging. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that, especially you've gone through it yourself.
Yeah, so you're right. We could spend another half hour talking about that question. There are two things I say in my book, the Dementia Care Partners Workbook. One is that caregiving is a marathon, not a sprint, and that caregiving is a team sport, not an individual event. And I think that because the average person diagnosed with any form of dementia, their lifespan is about 8 to 10 years. It is important to prepare yourself, through education, probably more than any other single strategy, to understand what is this disease, how can I best manage it given what's on the road ahead, and who does my team need to have on it so that I can, take the best care of my loved one and also take the best care of myself. And so I think this is what organizations like Senior Care Authority are all about. It's most people don't know how to do this, and so you have the opportunity to bring in a trained professional to assess kind of where the person with dementia is at and their family, and then how can you best walk on this journey with a group of people that are going to make a hard situation as easy as possible.
Right. Yeah, it's not easy, but if we, like you said, if we could help families in reducing some of their stress, we're not going to eliminate it, and that's make it easier, but it's not easy, then that's a great thing. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Shaw. Check them out at empatheducation.com. That's spelled EMPATH education.com. Thank you so much for joining us. And,
thank you.
I want to thank everybody out there. Please be safe.
You've been listening to Boomers Today with Frank Sampson. To learn more about today's show, visit boomerstodayradio.com and join us next time for another edition of Boomers Today.